Welcome to the Beyond the Veil Summit, a free online event where you'll explore the mysteries surrounding near-death experiences, mediumship, and the science of the afterlife. Share this event with your friends and family, and come join us on Facebook at The Shift Network.
Hello, and thank you for tuning into the Beyond the Veil Summit. I'm Nick Mattos, and it is my honor and pleasure to introduce somebody that you actually already know, Lisa Bonnice. Lisa is an award-winning author, a stand-up comedian, and I must say one of my favorite colleagues here at the Shift Network. In her role as program host, she has interviewed such luminaries as Greg Braden, Anita Moorjani, and the wonderful Stanislav Grof. Her latest book, The Puppet Master, is a metaphysical comedy that is the beach read about witchcraft that you didn't know that you needed. And her newest book, which is currently in progress, The Maxwell Curse, is about breaking the ties that bind us. It is my honor and my pleasure to introduce Lisa Bonnice.
Hi, Nick. It is so nice to talk to you this afternoon.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. So let's jump right into it, because in the context of this summit, we've been talking a lot about NDEs. So I'd love to hear more about your NDE experience.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't realize that I'd actually had one until I started hosting the summit and interviewing people. And then I realized when I was in second grade, I became just deathly ill and spent what felt like forever, but was probably a week to 10 days in bed. And I was so sick and so uncomfortable that I left my body on a regular basis and really didn't think much about it at the time because I was a kid, and who knows at that age that this isn't something that everybody does. And I didn't realize until I'd listened to some of the stories that you'll hear in this summit that one of those times that I left my body was actually a near-death experience. I checked out and I had no intention of coming back. And I remember talking to someone all in white who spent time with me and read books to me and told me that if I went back, I would get to write books. But I had to do it soon because no one in my family knew that I wasn't in my body anymore. They just thought I was sleeping. And meantime, they were planning to take me to the hospital and make me undergo surgery. But if I went back, I would start getting better soon, and I wouldn't need the surgery that they were talking about. And as I mentioned, I didn't realize until recently that this was an NDE because I always thought that they had to happen in an emergency room or a hospital and be medically documented to count. But realistically, there's no way that every NDE that happens has a doctor as a witness. So, yeah, I did have an NDE as a child.
Fascinating. And that sounds like it really set you on a path as a writer. So what has been the ongoing resonance of that experience in your work?
Yeah, it was funny because as I mentioned, I was told, well, I get to write books, and having this experience as a child caused me to sort of step outside of the well-defined boundaries of life as an ordinary little white girl growing up in the Midwest. It really allowed me to open up to the psychic realm, and it caused me to always know that a writer is what I'm here to be. No matter what I'm doing as my day job, this is what I'm meant to do. I'm using the word meant in finger quotes here, even though I don't particularly love sitting down and doing it. But having this experience also made me feel very different from my family and friends. Like, I could never understand why they didn't know the same things that I knew and why they didn't see life the same way that I do. And I finally understood as I got older that this was the perspective through which my writings would be delivered, through this, sort of otherworldly experience. And so my own unique voice, as it were, was something that others might actually be interested in hearing. So yeah, just being told by this being that, you get to write books. You love to read books. You get to write them. So go on back and write your books. So that's how that whole thing sort of began.
Now, were you able to stay in continuous contact with that being after the NDE, or was it really a one-time thing with that specific entity?
That was actually until very recently. That was sort of a one-time thing because after that, I spent most of my life feeling very alone, very disconnected from what people would call spirit guides or angels. I believed other people when they would tell their stories. Oh, my spirit guide tells me this, and they communicate with their guides, and I couldn't. It was like I was shut off from any kind of communication. So I spent most of the years after that trying to reconnect and feeling all this frustration that I couldn't deliberately and consciously connect, only through when I was actually writing. That's when I finally had the realization that that was how I was making the connection. So I had to write if I wanted to connect with anything on the other side. Since then, I've learned to do it differently. But first, I had to really exercise that muscle and sort of force it to happen.
Well, and that brings me to a three-part question. I'm curious to hear more about your practices in terms of spiritual life and how you have that conscious connection, your creative practice as a writer, and the ways that those intersect.
Okay. Well, when I was very tiny, I've always had this sort of witchy thing. I've always, really connected with the concept of being a witch, even though, in real life that's not real. But in the writing process or any kind of artistic process, as I'm sure anybody who's an artist who's watching this knows, you really do have to sort of tap into the psychic world to access your muse or whatever kind of information does want to be delivered through you. And I've sort of lost track of the question. If you can remind me. I wanted
to know more about your spiritual practices, your creative practices, and the places where those intersect.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, again, as far as spiritual practices go, I think I have too much ADD to really focus on, like a lot of people do meditation, shamanic journeying, all of these things. Those really don't work for me. So again, sitting down to write a story, or even if I'm just sitting on the couch writing in my head, that to me is my spiritual practice, because that's how I've learned to communicate with my ancestors. I've become a fanatic about ancestral healing, in case anybody's watched the summits that I've hosted on that. That has become my spiritual practice, is my constant efforts to reach across the veil and connect and exercise that muscle. So I don't know that I have what many people would call an actual spiritual practice where I sit down every day and I do the same thing and I make the connection. Again, as far as writing is concerned, I learned that if I don't write the things that are coming through, those things begin happening in the real world around me, which is actually how I started writing the Puppet Master, because I was getting this, this is going to sound a little zany, the story was forced into my head by a presence that said it was a fairy, and it took me forever to write this book because I didn't believe in fairies. I didn't believe that they were real, but I soon realized that I have to start writing this because, as I mentioned, the stories that I wrote about in the book were happening in real life, and my kids were telling me, Mom, write this stuff because we're getting really tired of all this crazy stuff happening to us. So that I learned to not ignore my inspiration from the other side. That was, I think, probably the most potent example that I can offer.
And that's beautiful. And that seems so intrinsically a spiritual practice. Like, to speak to one of the things that you mentioned there about sort of the witchy energy that moves in you, as somebody else for whom really likes to ride that particular witchy energy, it seems like those practices are really about grounding the metaphysical into our daily lives and into our practices, that we get to have an ordinary magic that we live with. So I'm curious because that magic really comes through clearly in the Puppet Master. How is that going in your current work and the book that you're currently working on?
Oh, that's actually, I'm glad that I sort of cut my teeth on the Puppet Master, because I allowed myself to realize that this is real. This isn't just my imagination, that these phenomenon are actually really happening. And I learned to pay attention to them when I was, let me backtrack a bit to a book I wrote called Fear of Our Father. This was a true crime novel that I wrote with a friend who experienced just horrific abuse growing up, and her parents were murdered, and it's a very long story, but along the way, she attempted suicide. And I was trying to write this, I interviewed her and I got the story out of her, but when it came to that specific scene, I felt uncomfortable asking her because it was so raw, and I didn't want to ask, what's it like to kill yourself? So because I was trying to, write about it. This wasn't an intentional thing, but as I was in the middle of working on that scene, I was laying on the couch one afternoon, and I found myself frozen in place. I couldn't move at all. I was wide awake, but I couldn't move. And I started having anxiety, pains in my chest. It wasn't a heart attack, but it was definite pains. And I couldn't move. And I thought, I have to get up and call 911. Something very bad is happening here. But again, I couldn't move. And I faded in and out of consciousness where I would be terrified and hanging on to life. And then I would just sort of let go and allow myself to die, and then spring back to life and go, oh my God, no. And this went on for a very long time, probably 15 minutes, but again, it felt like forever. But then once it let me go and I was able to move again, that's when I realized, okay, that's what she experienced as she was dying in the suicide attempt and then coming back to life again. So, again, that's another example of allowing this kind of information to come through to you. You have to be careful what you ask for because you'll get this delivered to you. But you asked about the one that I'm working on now. This one is my life's work. This one is going to be, the big thing for me. It's a story that I discovered in my genealogy research. Again, I'm obsessed with ancestral healing and genealogy. And I discovered a witch trial in my very ancient past in the 1600s, where there was a curse laid on my family. And fast forward a couple hundred years, I discovered that my great-grandfather and other family members were killed in a massive mine explosion. So the witch trial ended in execution by fire. And now in this mine explosion, death by fire. And as I'm looking into this whole story, I'm seeing that there's a lot of death by fire in my family. So that's a pattern that I'm noticing as far as ancestral healing goes. But for writing this book, I'm trying to connect with my ancestors, specifically the ones from Scotland who came over to Utah where the mine explosion occurred. And as I'm trying to connect with these ancestors, I ended up going to Scotland, first of all, to do some research to find out what did it look like there. You can't write about something you don't know. And as I was going to go to the town where my great-grandmother was born, and we were driving right past it. Didn't realize that was the sign. And just as we were about to drive past the town, I heard, "Turn here," and realized then that there was a sign into this town. So we turned right into that town and ended up parking across the street from where she was born. And so we got out and we walked around it. And I had developed a horrible cold. The weather in Scotland is much different than it is here in Arizona. So I was really sick, and it was rainy and nasty. And I heard, this direction, go to the end of the street, go into this shop. And in this shop, they were selling wool scarves. Now, this was June, so I didn't have a scarf or anything with me, but I bought a wool scarf on the advice of my great-grandmother who was coming through, so that way I could, stay warm in this freezing air while I was getting so deathly sick. But I was also offered the information that one of the reasons I got so sick while I was in Scotland is so I could relate to what it would feel like back in the days before medical care, because I was nowhere near my doctor. I didn't know any of the brand names. It was scary to be so sick in a place where I didn't know how to get health care. And that was an experience that she had. So again, these are experiences that I don't necessarily enjoy having, but they're absolutely information being delivered from the other side that then gets written about very authentically.
That is beautiful. Almost as beautiful as the country of Scotland itself. My goodness. Yes.
Yes.
Amazing. So you bring up something very interesting when you talk about this information coming through you. There's a particular author that I really love, Elizabeth Gilbert, and in her book, Big Magic, which highly recommended for everybody listening, she talks about how there was this quantum shift from thinking about genius as something that moved in and through us, that we were a vessel for genius, to a certain sort of Enlightenment era that we were geniuses, and how this concept that this inspiration emerges from us and that we're the fount of it rather than the vessel for it is really damaging for creative people. So I'm curious, like, as you have this journey of connecting with sort of really kind of the spiritual realm in order to work properly as a writer, what sort of additional information comes through? Does that impact your sense of yourself as a channel for this?
Yeah, again, this is something that it took me a long time to wrap my head around because, I'm like everybody else with self-doubts. And as I was growing up, you have that imposter syndrome where, who am I to write a book? Who am I to think I can be successful? Who am I to think anybody gives a crap what I have to write about? But as I grew up and I matured and I started making these kinds of connections, I realized that I really am here to do a specific task, a specific set of books, specific writings to add to the vibe of the world. And so as far as a muse or a genius, it feels to me like, again, going back to the ancestral healing, that I am the face of everyone who came before me. I am the living face of my ancestors. So this is so much bigger than me. This human being here in this human suit. This is bigger than all of us. So that I am the representation of this story, and in that way, I can remove my own little ego saying, "Who do you think you are?" Well, I don't think I'm anything. I am here to do a job, and I will open myself to that information flowing through me, whether I like it or not, because if I don't, it's going to hurt. Not because anybody's punishing me, but because I'm blocking that creative energy that flows through.
Absolutely. Like, if you don't turn the tap on at a certain point, the pipes are going to burst,
Yes.
And in a sense, that's part of what we're seeing in the world more broadly right now, that a lot of bursting pipes going on. And you mentioned the vibe of the world. We're in a really, really challenging time. And it's really challenging to source a sense of hope and inspiration at times right now. I'm currently in California where we're currently choked out with smoke, and I don't even need to go into the whole laundry list of things. So I'm curious to hear where you source that sense of hope and how your NDE experiences and your experiences beyond the veil connect you with that hope.
That's really an interesting question, because I've actually given this some thought without knowing you were going to ask me about that. I sometimes feel like, we're all doomed. This is going to end any second now. Somebody's going to push a button and we're all going to blow up. But then I hear, again, this calming information saying that, first of all, that is one possible scenario. There's endless parallel existences. Personally, I hope that the one that I'm in is one where we come out on the other side. I mean, if you ever watch Star Trek, The Next Generation, for example, is my favorite franchise of that show, where eventually they do come to a civilization where they don't need money anymore. They don't have racism. They've solved all of these problems. I do believe that that's possible. I believe that it's inevitable in at least one of our time streams. And I'm really hoping that my work, your work, our work, what we're doing with the Shift Network, what all conscious people are working together to create, I sincerely hope that that's what we're all working toward. And we're going to have to slog through the muck to get there, because there's a lot of muck. There's a lot of unconsciousness. There's a lot of history in our way. So, yeah, I guess it's our work. That's what we're here to do, to push through it.
I think your work as a writer, more so than a lot of people that I've talked with, contributes to that. Because throughout your work, and I do really like your work, is this glimmer of hope and a glimmer that an ordinary magic is available in each moment. Even when you're talking about true crime of all subjects, you still are able to really keep a connection with that. So I'm curious, because you are quite prolific, again, as a stand-up comedian, as a Shift Network program host, as a writer. How do you get your flow going again when that starts to get stuck or you start to get overwhelmed?
Right. And it does happen. It absolutely does. My favorite tool, I actually wrote about this in my very first book, Shapeshifting. So I've been using this for years, is I am very aware of, as I mentioned, there are many parallel lives that we can be living. And my hope is that this one you're talking to right now is the one who achieves this. Sorry, just banged my door here. I'm the one who achieves the success that I came here to accomplish. So I know that in my future, there is a Lisa Bonnice who is best-selling author, well-read around the world, has actually made a difference in humanity, all the things that I feel I'm here to do, that I wish I'm here to do. That Lisa exists in my future. So I will, drop into as much of an expanded state as I can muster and connect with that Lisa and say, all right, I have no idea what to write here. I know the general idea of where I want to go with this, but what do I do with my fingers when I put it on the keyboard? What does the best-selling book that you wrote say next? And then I just sort of let it go. And then generally within a day or so, it'll pop in and I sit down and, the fingers start flying again. That's my favorite tool, and it works almost every single time. When it doesn't work, that's when I pull out the oracle cards. I'm a big fan of oracle cards. I don't get tarot. I don't have the inner workings, too much ADD again to really learn all the meanings of tarot cards. But oracle cards are my favorite. In fact, let me give Carrie Paris a plug. She wrote the Relative Tarot and Oracle deck. And when I'm writing about my ancestors, etc., I will pull cards asking them, okay, what happened next? Because I'm writing a historical story. I can research as much as I want. I can find tremendous amounts about their story through Ancestry.com or newspapers.com or going to Scotland. I mean, I found so much factual information that I can write the technical story, but I want to know, what did the people experience? What was it like for you when you came over from Scotland to Utah, which are two entire, they're planets apart. So I pull out the cards and they'll tell me the story. Okay, well, this is what happened next. This is what I would have felt like. And it's been remarkable how useful something like that is, because again, it gets me out of my way. I'm not the writer. I'm the person who's delivering the information. It's coming out of my fingers.
Music to my ears. I am a fellow Oracle card dork. I'm curious to hear any of your recommendations for your favorite decks or ones that have really had an impact on you other than the Relative Oracle.
Yeah, I really like, what's the name of it? I believe it's by Colette Baron Reed. It's I believe it's called the Avalon Oracle. Let's see, what other ones do I really, really like? I like the Osho Zen deck, but again, that's a tarot deck. As far as writing prompting, I really have been getting the most good luck with the Relative Oracle deck.
Fabulous. Now, as this is the Shift Network, we like to go kind of deep here. And so I'd like to talk about the nature of time and the space beyond the veil. Because when you were talking about your NDE, you mentioned that there was sort of a linear timeline that happened, that there was communication that was in sentences, et cetera. And in your talking about your friend's NDE, you talked about, the experience that you had of understanding your friend's NDE. You said that it felt like it took a really long time, but it was about 15 minutes in the sort of physical space. So I'm curious, as somebody who's talked with a lot of luminaries in this, what is your sense of how time works beyond the veil, and how does that interface with how time works here on this side?
Wow. Oh, I love this question because I'm a major Doctor Who freak as well. So the idea of time and space is things are wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. Wow. Where do I begin with this? Part of what I love about what I mentioned earlier about connecting with my future self or with other parallel selves, that to me sort of explains the way that I look at time and space, that we can, and in fact, I think that's what I learned from the NDE, because before it happened, I was just a typical kid. I'd get up in the morning, I'd eat breakfast, I'd go to school. Life was very linear and very logical and very laid out. But after that, I really had a difficult time keeping track of time. And I think that that's one of the things that while I was out of my body, I let go of and wasn't even able to get it back. I have to work really hard to stay on time. I've become so punctual now. I'm like anal retentive punctual. I keep clocks and calendars because I have to. Otherwise, I will lose all track of time and space. So, does that answer your question, or should we go further?
Yeah, and I'm curious because that is definitely very experiential. How do you feel like that plays out in the context of some of the other narratives that you've heard from luminaries in this summit and others about how time works beyond the veil?
Right, yeah. One of the things that I've learned in interviewing these people, because I'm asking most of them, in your estimation, in your experience, what is the veil? And all of them are basically saying, they're using their own words, of course, but they're all saying the same basic thing that I became aware of, that the veil itself it's not really a physical construct, it's a vibrational construct. And when you allow yourself to raise your vibration, to use cliches, you are able to connect across the veil. You can't do it while you're in your physical body because your physical body is of a lower vibration. So when you're on the other side of the veil, there is no time, there is no space. People will talk about having the life review. You see your life pass before your eyes, but they're not watching it like a movie, start to finish. They're seeing the entire thing in this sort of panoramic vision where all they have to do, but this is even bringing space into it, but there's really no way to explain it when you're in your human suit. So they're able to just sort of look at their entire lives in this panorama around them and sort of pinpoint things that have happened. And if they focus on anything particular, boom, they're brought there in a second. But even using the word second brings time into it. They're instantaneous, they're there. And once they get past this life review, have you seen the movie What Dreams May Come?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so it's very like that they describe, where Robin Williams' character, he just thinks something and he's there. Things that he doesn't even realize he's thinking are happening. So it's actually a great lesson for metaphysics in the physical world, creating your own reality, etc. On the other side of the veil, things do happen instantaneously. The same thing is happening when you're here in the physical. It just takes a lot longer because there's this solid matter that we're moving slowly, very slowly. So it's basically on the other side of the veil. It's exactly the same, only completely different.
And that's the beautiful paradox of it. And it seems like that sense, the effect that you're talking about, that the things that we're wanting manifest, even if we aren't conscious that we're manifesting them, seems to speak to the necessity of shadow work in these bodies and in this lifetime, that we're going to have points of attraction in our shadows that we're otherwise not really handling, that are bringing stuff to us and manifesting things that we really don't want in a conscious sense, but that unconsciously we do want. I'm curious to hear if you have any sort of practices or engagement with that sort of shadow work.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I come back to the ancestral healing because I've tried many different things over the years, but by working with ancestors, with doing ancestral healing, is the one that really works for me. Everything else is like, oh, that's interesting, but I was never able to really focus on it. Again, the ADD. What works for me works beautifully, and what doesn't work for me, it just doesn't land. So when I learned that a lot of my shadow issues came from patterns, behavior patterns, epigenetically inherited things that you don't even know your parents experienced because they don't know that their parents experienced, and it all forms us. It's like water eroding a rock. Things are very slowly progressed over the eons to where I am who I am because of what happened to all of them before me. So if I'm going to try to understand who I am, I need to understand who they were. And by learning the things that they experienced, it almost magically solves problems. For example, my grandfather, one of them who came over from Scotland, he was a coal miner, but he was only 16 when they arrived here. So he survived. He wasn't at the coal mine when it exploded. His father and uncle and cousin were killed in the mine. But now he had survivor's guilt as a teenager. And they were orphaned because their mother had died before that. But none of us knew this story until I started doing the research. And now looking back, I can see, okay, well, that's why this boy who left his homeland from Scotland to come to this alien landscape of Utah, it's gorgeous there, but it's completely different from Scotland, loses both of his parents almost immediately, and life just falls apart from there. He goes through 3 marriages. He abandons his children. I now understand who he was and why he did the things he did. And I have absolute compassion and understanding for him. In the meantime, though, my mom, who was just a teenage girl when her father abandoned the family, couldn't understand, why didn't my dad love me? She never got over that. She never understood what was the story behind this. But because I've done this specific kind of work, I absolutely understand what happened to her. And that explains so much about why she did the things she did. And, my mother issues are so easily explained by understanding her father issues. So that's the kind of shadow work that really works for me.
That is extraordinary. And it kind of speaks to a two-way communication back and forth for the Veil, too, that you're getting the information that you need in order to transform and transmute the experience that you're having, but also you're sending information back in order to sort of fulfill that work for it.
Yes.
How do you see that two-way communication working in the context of NDEs more broadly? Are we being gifted collectively some information with it, or is it primarily a one kind of a localized personal revelation?
I think that when we do this kind of work, and bringing back the NDE, that I think having that experience as a child allowed me to understand that there is there is another side of consciousness, that there is more to life than we dream of in our philosophies. So I think having that experience as a child was mandatory for me to have the perspective of how the world works for me to do this kind of work, because I also feel that actually, I don't feel this. I know this. It's been demonstrated far too many times for me to deny. I am here to do this specific work. I'm not only here to write books about this so other people can learn through fiction, because that's my favorite way, sci-fi fantasy, of learning about magic and metaphysics and all this, is by reading stories about how it happens. I'm not so much into the self-help books, which are wonderful, but fiction's my thing. Anyway, so I'm here to write this book, but I'm also here to heal these patterns for them, because when they died, they brought this with them. In fact, let me tell you a quick story. My daughter and I went up to Utah to visit the place where this the coal mine explosion occurred, and it was, oh my God, there were so many ghosts. It was amazing. I've never really been a ghosty kind of person, but there was no denying the place was just riddled with them. And the cemetery where my grandparents were buried, and my great uncle and my grandpa's cousin, they were buried in the cemetery that's right over the mine. The mine is down here, and the land at the cemetery is right here. And one of the graves is collapsing. So you can look down into this hole in the earth and see, oh my God, that was the coal mine that they died in right underneath there. And I was with my daughter, who's very, she's a prayer warrior, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it. She did prayers at this cemetery that were so powerful because there was 170 men who died in this mine explosion. It wasn't just my 3 family members. And most of the miners were buried here on this plot of land. And again, I did all my research, I did a lot of the research, so I knew the story of my people, but I didn't know what had happened to everybody else. And as my daughter was doing all of these prayers and really just working with the heavy energy that is in this place, I could see in psychic terms, I could see this sort of mist rising from the grounds of the cemetery, where all of these men who had been stuck in time, because their lives were snuffed out like that. The explosion happened and they were dead instantly. And so they were sort of stuck in this loop of hell. A lot of them thought that they were in hell because, many people have been taught, if you sin, you die, you will burn in hellfire for eternity. And these men who were coal miners, there were brothels and saloons. It was during Prohibition, so they had speakeasies. They were sinners, and they died in fire. And so a lot of them felt trapped in hell, that's what had actually happened to them, that they were in hell, not that they were stuck in this psychic loop of time, this constantly replaying their death over and over. So as she's doing this praying, and I'm seeing this mist rising, of the men rising and leaving this hell that they were trapped in. And I was able to see at my grandmother and great-grandmother and great-grandfather's graves, I'm going to start crying, she had been waiting for them all these years. She had left the earthly realm, and she was waiting for her boys. And so they were actually finally released. I'm choking up. It's so touching. So yeah, that's, I forgot the question again. I hope I answered it.
This is fabulous because I think the key thing that you're talking about is that release and the absolute wonder and magic that is available in there for everyone when that release happens. I get the sense that there's a lot of people who are listening to this who are waiting for a sense of release and permission to connect with themselves as creative people and connect with themselves as intuitive people, as people with a connection beyond the veil, and that there is that two-way communication happening. So as we're starting to draw to a close, I'd love to hear any wisdom, any guidance, any intuition that you have for those people who are waiting for that permission slip and that allowance to be free.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to just be playful with it. Don't take it so seriously, and become aware of what the imposter syndrome even is, where you feel like, who do I think I am? You're here to do what you're here to do, and only you know what that is. No one can tell you why you're here. And if you're feeling made small, that you're not supposed to express yourself, well, that's somebody else's crap that's been fed into you, whether it's been in this lifetime, ancestral lifetimes, past lifetimes, etc. Just be aware that that's all just BS programming that's been delivered to you. You are, you're here for a reason. And have fun with it. I think the easiest way to start working on connecting with the other side is, for example, when I was doing stand-up comedy, it's not easy to write jokes. In fact, it's one of the hardest things to do is to actually write a funny joke. It's easy to write a joke, but a funny one where you'll get strangers to laugh at, that's hard. So even when I was young, I somehow knew that Harpo Marx was always one of my favorite when I was growing up. I loved the Marx Brothers. And I would just sort of lay in bed and I would just think, what would Harpo do? Even though Harpo didn't speak, he was an incredibly funny man. And so I would just sort of ask Harpo, give me some ideas. In fact, my cat's even named Harpo. I just realized that. I knew my cat's name was Harpo. I just realized there's a connection. So anyway, by allowing yourself to just daydream and have fun with it, that's, I think, the best way to open yourself to this kind of information and to release your doubts. And that, to me, is what writer's block is all about, is the either fear that you're fooling yourself, or fear of actually making contact with something on the other side, and just, only ask for good things. Ask for your friendly helpers to come through, and ask for inspiration and help with your work specifically to help you do what you came here to do. And in that way, you're almost guaranteed some kind of results.
Fantastic. So I know that your latest book, The Puppet Master, is available anywhere that books are sold, and that everybody should rush out to their favorite independent bookstore and go order a copy right now for it, and that the Maxwell Curse will be coming out very soon as well, or fairly soon as well too. Yeah.
Well, it's still in progress. I'm actually hoping to get it. It's a 3-part book, so there's a lot of work. This, to me, is going to be my life's work. This is my masterpiece. Book 1 takes place in the 1600s in Scotland. Book 2 takes place in Utah in the 1920s, and then book 3 is going to be the modern day wrapping up, tying together of all of these stories and how it all resolves, again, in a fictional way. And when I say 3 books, I don't mean 3 individual books. I mean, one big book with 3 sections. And I intend to have this whole thing done by the 100-year anniversary of the mine explosion, which again was in 1924. So, I've got a little time to work on it, but I'm making good progress.
Fantastic. And if people want to stay apprised of your work and know when they need to rush down to their independent bookstore and go order a copy of the Maxwell Curse, where can they find more information about you?
I'm at lisabonnice.com. And in fact, now that you mention it, there is a sequel to The Puppet Master that is also cooking on a burner. I'm done writing the book. Now it's just a matter of editing and tweaking and prettying it up, polishing it. But there is a sequel to The Puppet Master on its way, probably sooner than the Maxwell Curse, at lisabonnice.com.
This interview has made my day. I'm sure that it has made many others. And hearing that there's a sequel to The Puppet Master alone is mind-blowing. Lisa, it is always such a pleasure, and it is such an honor to get to interview you for this summit. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Nick. This has been a fun conversation. I always love talking to you anyway, so who better to talk about this stuff?
I know, the love fest, it just don't stop. And thank you very much for all those who've tuned in for this summit as well. Again, my name is Nick Mattos. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here, and I hope that you enjoy all the rest of the extraordinary speakers in this summit. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Beyond the Veil Summit, brought to you by the Shift Network. To learn more, visit beyondtheveilsummit.com. To join our global community of people awakening to their divine humanity and taking inspired action, visit theshiftnetwork.com. Thank you again for gathering with us and for sharing this healing path with your friends and family.